Most seniors think they're doing the right thing by eating low-fat, but it's actually wrecking their hormones and confusing their entire system. In this video, you'll discover why your body needs fat to stay balanced, and how avoiding it could lead to serious issues you never expected. There's one specific kind of fat that can change everything, and you'll find out what it is before this video ends. Before we start, tell us where you're watching or listening from. If you find this helpful, hit the subscribe button, because tomorrow we have new special tips for you. Margaret was 74 years old when she decided to change how she ate. She wasn't sick, but she had seen a lot of ads on TV saying fat is bad for you and cut fat to live longer. At first, it seemed simple. She just wanted to be healthy and strong for her grandchildren. She remembered her own mother always cooking with butter and olive oil, but now the world felt different. There were fat-free yogurts, light cheese, and even cookies that said 0 fat on the label. Margaret filled her kitchen with these. She gave away her olive oil and tossed out the nuts she used to eat every afternoon. She even began pouring off the golden broth from her chicken soup. "I'm doing this for my heart," she told her daughter one day with a proud smile. The first few weeks, she didn't feel much different, but slowly, tiny changes began to show. She started waking up in the middle of the night, unable to fall back asleep. Her skin, which was always soft, felt dry and itchy. Margaret thought maybe it was the weather, so she bought new lotions. They didn't help. She also noticed her hair was thinning. A little more stayed behind in her comb each morning. Then, she started to feel sad without knowing why. She wasn't depressed, at least she didn't think so, but something inside her just felt flat and heavy. Things she used to enjoy, gardening, puzzles, and tea with her friends, suddenly didn't bring her much joy. At lunch, she often felt cold, even on sunny days. Her hands were cold too. She started wearing an extra sweater inside the house. Her daughter asked if she was okay. Margaret nodded, but deep down, she knew something wasn't quite right. Her memory also seemed fuzzy. She would forget where she placed her reading glasses, even though they were sitting right on her lap. She chalked it up to age, but still, it didn't feel normal. She was used to being sharp, to remembering everyone's birthdays, and finishing the crossword faster than her grandson. Now, her mind felt slower, like it was walking through thick fog. Then came the fatigue. Margaret used to go on short walks every afternoon. But now, just the thought of putting on her shoes made her tired. She started skipping her walks. She didn't understand why her body felt so drained. It wasn't sadness, not really. It was like her spark had gone out. One morning, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she noticed how pale she looked. Her eyes weren't as bright. Her smile didn't come as easily. Her daughter, who worked as a nurse, visited and gently asked about her diet. Margaret proudly told her she'd stopped eating fat. "No butter, no oil, no nuts, nothing bad," she said. Her daughter frowned. "Mom," she said softly, "our bodies need fat, especially your body. It helps your hormones work properly." Margaret blinked. Hormones? She thought those were just for teenagers. "No," her daughter explained. "Hormones are for everyone. They help with sleep, mood, energy, and even how warm or cold you feel." Margaret sat back in her chair. Suddenly, things started to make sense. Could it be that cutting fat had made her feel this way? Could food affect how her body felt, not just how it looked? She remembered how her mother used to serve her chicken soup with the golden broth still in it, how her skin used to glow, how she used to sleep like a baby after a warm dinner. She realized she had taken advice from strangers on TV without asking her own body how it felt. That night, she added a little olive oil to her vegetables. The next day, she put a handful of almonds in her oatmeal. And slowly, piece by piece, she started feeling better. Her spark didn't return all at once, but within weeks, she was walking again. Her sleep came easier. Her smile returned more often. She still avoided fried foods and greasy snacks, but she made peace with good fats. And most of all, she listened to her body's quiet voice, one that said, "Thank you." Margaret's journey reminds us that wisdom doesn't always come from loud voices on TV. Sometimes it comes from silence, from stillness, from noticing how we truly feel. And sometimes the smallest changes, like a spoonful of healthy fat, can bring back a whole world of joy. Margaret didn't know at the time, but her story was just beginning. Because now she wanted to understand more. What exactly are hormones, and why do they matter so much, especially as we age? Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a steaming cup of tea and a notebook. She had written one word in big letters across the top: hormones. She didn't know much about them, but she was curious now. Her daughter said they were important, especially for older people like her. So Margaret wanted to understand what they really were. She imagined hormones were like little helpers inside her body, kind of like tiny mail carriers running around delivering important messages. And you know what? That's actually very close to the truth. Hormones are special chemicals that your body makes to tell different parts what to do and when to do it. Just like a letter tells you what's happening, hormones carry messages to your heart, your brain, your bones, your muscles, even your stomach. There are many types of hormones, and each one has its own job. Some help you feel sleepy at night. Some help you wake up in the morning. Some keep your bones strong. Others help you feel happy or calm. Margaret learned that hormones are made in special parts of the body, like the thyroid, the pancreas, and tiny little glands called the adrenal glands. These are small, but very powerful. She thought of them like little workers in a factory, always busy, always trying to keep things just right. The whole system is like a dance, with everything needing to move together in harmony. When one part gets out of step, the whole dance feels off. That's why when hormones get too high or too low, people don't feel quite like themselves. Margaret learned that hormone problems don't just happen to young people or pregnant women. No, they can affect older people too, sometimes even more. As we age, our bodies naturally slow down in making certain hormones. That's why sleep can get harder or why bones become more fragile. It's also why some older folks feel tired more often or why their moods swing without warning. Margaret remembered feeling all those things over the past few months. Suddenly, it made more sense. Her body wasn't just getting older. It was asking for help. And the help it needed came from something she had taken away: healthy fat. Hormones need building blocks to be made. And guess what? Fat is one of the main building blocks. Without enough fat, the body struggles to make hormones properly. That's like trying to send letters without paper or envelopes. Margaret was amazed by this. She thought cutting fat made her healthier, but instead, it made her body lose its balance. Hormones also help control hunger, digestion, temperature, and even how sharp the mind feels. It's not just one thing, they're everywhere. She read that cortisol helps us respond to stress. Insulin helps move sugar into our cells, and estrogen helps with bone strength and mood. Each one plays its part, and they don't shout. Hormones whisper. They speak quietly through gentle signs like dry skin, forgetfulness, cold hands, or a heavy heart. Sometimes we ignore those whispers, thinking it's just age. But Margaret realized that listening carefully to her body's whispers was part of being wise. She thought about her friends who were also feeling tired or moody. Maybe they, too, were missing something simple. Not pills, not fancy diets, just understanding. Margaret smiled and underlined one sentence in her notebook. Hormones are helpers, not enemies. She also learned about the hormone called leptin, which tells the brain when we're full. Without enough fat, leptin can't do its job, and people may overeat or feel hungry all the time. Then there's serotonin, a hormone that helps us feel happy and sleep peacefully. It needs fat too. Margaret finally understood why she felt so off. It wasn't her age, it was her hormones trying to talk to her. And now that she knew this, she felt powerful again. She wasn't helpless. She could make choices to support her body. She didn't need to fear the word fat anymore. She needed to make peace with it. Because fat, she now knew, was not the enemy. It was a partner, a quiet friend that helped her hormones do their job. Margaret closed her notebook and poured a small drizzle of olive oil into her soup, watching it swirl like golden ribbons. "To my hormones," she whispered with a chuckle. As the warm broth touched her lips, she felt comforted, not just by the taste, but by the knowledge. Her body wasn't broken. It was just waiting to be understood. And understanding came from listening, learning, and loving the body you live in. But now she was curious. If fat helps hormones, which kinds of fats are the right kind, and which ones should be avoided? Margaret couldn't stop thinking about fats. Not the kind that makes food greasy or fills up chip bags, but the kind her body was secretly crying out for. She wanted to learn which fats were her body's friends and which were not. She needed to know which ones helped her feel strong, steady, and peaceful inside. So, one sunny afternoon, she sat in her favorite armchair with a cozy blanket, a cup of chamomile tea, and her notebook again. On the first page, she wrote 3 big words: fats help hormones. Then, she circled it just to remind herself. Now she was on a mission to discover what kinds of fats her body needed to make her feel like herself again. She remembered her mother cooking with real butter, not too much, just enough to make the eggs glisten in the pan. She remembered the smell of roasted fish with olive oil and lemon, and the creamy texture of avocado that her aunt would mash on toast. Back then, people didn't count every gram of fat. They just cooked with care and love. Margaret thought maybe that's what her body had been missing. Not just fat, but the good kind, the kind that comes from nature, not from a factory. She read that healthy fats are like bricks that build houses for your hormones. Without them, the house falls apart. The walls wobble. The windows don't shut tight. But with the right fats, everything becomes strong and sturdy again. Her brain was like one of those houses, and it needed strong walls to think clearly and feel calm. She learned that the human brain is actually made up of about 60% fat. That shocked her. No wonder I felt so foggy, she thought. My brain was hungry for the right building blocks. Margaret began writing a list. At the top, she wrote good fats. Underneath, she wrote olive oil, avocados, nuts like almonds and walnuts, seeds like flaxseed and chia, fatty fish like salmon, and even a little butter from grass-fed cows. All these fats, she learned, were filled with something called omega-3s and omega-6s. These strange-sounding names were actually very friendly. They helped reduce inflammation in the body and kept her heart, brain, and joints happy. She smiled at the idea that a spoonful of flaxseed or a piece of salmon could bring comfort to her tired knees or a restless mind. She also wrote a second list, not-so-good fats. These were fats that were tricky. They hid in fried foods, snack cakes, margarine, and anything that said partially hydrogenated oil. Margaret learned these fats were like noisy neighbors who made trouble in the hormone neighborhood. They made it harder for her body to work well. They confused her hormones and sometimes even blocked them from doing their jobs. She remembered how she used to buy fat-free cookies, thinking they were better. But those cookies often replaced fat with sugar or fake ingredients. It's not just about fat, she whispered to herself. It's about the kind of fat. Every healthy fat she read about had a special gift to offer. Avocados gave her fiber and potassium. Walnuts helped her heart. Olive oil supported her brain. Even egg yolks, those golden centers she used to avoid, had choline, which helped with memory. Margaret was stunned. These foods weren't enemies. They were protectors. She had been running from them without ever giving them a chance. She began to look at her plate differently, not with fear, but with curiosity and gratitude. She also learned that fat helps the body absorb certain vitamins, like vitamin A for her eyes, D for her bones, E for her skin, and K for her blood. Without fat, these vitamins can't get where they need to go. They're like passengers at a bus stop with no bus to pick them up. No wonder my skin felt so dry, she thought. The bus never came. Her notebook now had hearts drawn around the words olive oil and omega-3. It looked more like a love letter than science notes. But that's how she felt, grateful, as if she had found old friends again. That evening, Margaret made a simple dinner. A piece of grilled salmon with a drizzle of olive oil and a side of steamed broccoli sprinkled with sunflower seeds. She ate slowly, tasting every bite like it was a poem. She didn't feel guilty. She felt wise. She knew she wasn't overdoing it. She was feeding her hormones, her mind, and her mood. And it wasn't about eating more. It was about eating right. She knew her body would need time to adjust, but she already felt something warming inside her, a little light turning back on. She realized that food could be medicine when chosen with care. Not the kind of medicine that comes in a bottle, but the kind that came from the earth, filled with nature's wisdom. And when food and knowledge come together, healing begins. Not just in the body, but in the spirit. Margaret now saw fat not as something to fear, but as something to respect. It was part of her, part of life, part of balance. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, smiling. But now that she knew what helped, she wanted to understand more deeply. What exactly happened to her body when she cut fat? And how did it all start to fall apart without her even knowing? Margaret once believed she was doing everything right. When she first removed fat from her meals, she felt proud, like she was making smart choices. She switched to skim milk, bought fat-free crackers, and started skipping the yolks in her eggs. Her fridge was filled with light and low-fat labels, and her meals were smaller, drier, and simpler than ever before. She didn't fry anything. She barely used oil. She even gave up peanut butter, something she'd loved since she was a girl. She thought this was the path to feeling young and energized again. But over time, something strange began to happen inside her. Something quiet, something slow, something she didn't see coming. At first, it was little things. She started waking up tired, even though she had gone to bed early. Her energy during the day was low, like a battery that couldn't stay charged. Then her skin began to lose its glow. It felt thin, dry, and itchy. She tried lotions, even expensive ones from the store, but nothing made a difference. Her lips were chapped more often. Her hands looked older than usual. She started forgetting words, simple words, when talking to her grandchildren. Sometimes she would walk into a room and forget why she went in there. She thought maybe this was just aging, but deep inside, she felt it was something more. Her digestion slowed down too. She felt bloated after meals, and her stomach didn't move like it used to. Some days, she didn't feel hungry at all, and other days, she felt hungry right after eating. Her appetite had become confusing. Even her mood started to shift. The bright and cheerful Margaret, the one who sang while folding laundry, started to fade. She didn't feel exactly sad, but dull. Dim, like someone had gently turned down the lights inside her. She smiled less. She sat more. She stared out the window and didn't notice the birds. Her body didn't feel like her own anymore. Her sleep became a puzzle she couldn't solve. She would fall asleep, but wake up again and again. Sometimes she felt too hot, other times too cold. Her hands and feet were chilly, even under the covers. She added more blankets, but it didn't help. Her body felt confused about what temperature it should be. She often had headaches in the morning and her eyes seemed tired, even if she hadn't cried. She was more sensitive to light and sound. Little things began to bother her. Loud noises, bright lights, too many people talking at once. These things had never troubled her before. Her joints started to ache too. Not the deep pain of arthritis, but a kind of stiffness, like her body was moving through mud. Bending down to pick up a drop spoon felt like a chore. She had less strength in her arms and legs. Her muscles didn't feel as firm. She felt softer, but not in a good way. Her balance also changed. Once steady on her feet, now she felt wobbly at times. She worried about falling. That scared her most of all. She started using handrails more. Her walks became shorter. She told herself she was just being careful, but inside, she knew it was more than caution. It was weakness. Even her heartbeat changed. Some days it raced for no reason. Other days, it felt slow and sluggish. Her emotions started to swing. A happy phone call would suddenly leave her teary-eyed. A kind word from her neighbor made her cry. She felt like her feelings were out of tune, like a piano with a few keys that didn't sound right. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see wrinkles. She saw a woman she barely recognized. She missed the spark in her eyes. She missed the fire in her belly. She missed herself. She went to her doctor and had tests done. Everything looked normal. No big problems. No scary diseases. But that didn't help. She knew her body was telling the truth, even if the numbers didn't. Then her daughter sat her down and asked again about what she'd been eating. When Margaret explained how she had removed fat from almost everything, her daughter gently took her hands and said, "Mom, your body needs fat. It's how your hormones work. Without it, your whole system gets confused." Margaret listened closely. Her daughter explained that fats help hormones stay balanced, helping her sleep, digest food, stay warm, and feel calm. That was the moment everything clicked. All her strange symptoms, the sleep issues, dry skin, mood swings, joint aches, memory slips, and tired muscles, were signs that her hormones were struggling. Her body hadn't betrayed her. It had been asking for help the whole time. She had taken away the very thing her body needed to stay steady. Without fat, her hormones couldn't deliver their messages. It was like trying to run a town with no mail carriers, no traffic lights, and no clocks. Chaos, confusion, and things breaking down little by little. So Margaret began to slowly change. She added back the good fats, olive oil, avocado, nuts, and fatty fish. Not too much, just enough to give her body the tools it needed. And like a flower given water after a dry spell, she began to bloom again. Her sleep improved first, then her skin softened. Her mood lifted. She laughed more. She sang while folding laundry again. Her memory got sharper, and she began walking farther. Her joints felt looser. Her energy returned. Her body felt familiar again. And with each day, she felt more like Margaret. Her experience taught her that being healthy wasn't about removing everything. It was about understanding balance. She had learned the hard way, but she had learned deeply. She now shared her story with her friends, hoping they'd listen before making the same mistake. She wasn't afraid of fat anymore. She welcomed it carefully and kindly, like an old friend returning home. And as she turned the page in her notebook, she wrote one more thing. To age well is to nourish the body wisely, not punish it. But as she sipped her tea and felt the sun on her face, a new thought sparked in her heart. Maybe there's even more wisdom in learning to trust your body, to listen to it, and to love it through every season of life. Margaret had walked a long road, from proudly cutting fat out of her meals to watching her body quietly fall apart, to finally rediscovering the healing power of the foods she once feared. But her story wasn't just about food. It was about trust. It was about wisdom. It was about learning to listen again, not to the noise of the world, but to the quiet messages whispered by her own body. As she sat in her garden, watching the bees hum gently around the lavender, she thought about how far she had come, not just in health, but in understanding. For the first time in years, she felt deeply connected to her breath, her hunger, her sleep, her energy, her life. She realized something powerful. Her body had always been trying to help her, even when it ached, even when it slowed down, even when it got tired or sad or foggy. It wasn't working against her. It was working for her, trying to keep her safe, trying to send little messages that something was missing. She just hadn't known how to listen. Not until now. And now, she was ready to not only listen, but to trust. For many years, Margaret, like so many people, had believed that being good meant following all the food rules. Less fat, fewer calories, smaller portions. She had believed the magazines that told her to count every bite. She had believed the labels on the fat-free boxes and the promises that thinness meant health. But now she understood that being good wasn't about fear or restriction. It was about kindness. It was about giving her body what it truly needed. And sometimes that meant a spoonful of nut butter, a drizzle of olive oil, a soft egg yolk, or a creamy bite of avocado. Margaret realized that food wasn't something to control. It was something to respect, to savor, to celebrate. It was part of being alive. She started to slow down when she ate, chewing thoughtfully, tasting each bite, and noticing how her body felt afterward. She began to ask herself gentle questions like, did that give me energy? Did that help me feel full and calm? Did that warm my hands? She was no longer judging her food. She was learning from it. She had made peace with her plate, and in doing so, she had made peace with herself. And that peace brought a new kind of wisdom, an elder wisdom. Not the kind written in books or shouted on the news, but the kind that comes from lived experience. The kind that grows quietly, like moss on an old tree, or the gentle lines that form from years of laughter and tears. Margaret felt proud of her age now, proud of the softness in her cheeks and the strength in her spine, proud of the way she had listened, learned, and changed. She saw food differently now, not as numbers or rules, but as nourishment, love, and medicine. She also began sharing her story. At her senior center, she started a little group called the Listening Table. It wasn't a diet group. It was a circle of chairs where older women and men could sit and talk about food, memories, fears, and how their bodies were feeling. They brought recipes from their childhood, stories about what their mothers used to cook, and shared how modern diets had left them confused and tired. Together, they rebuilt a sense of trust in their own wisdom. They cooked meals with real ingredients, shared tips on how to cook with joy again, and reminded each other that aging didn't mean fading. It meant awakening. Margaret kept her notebook nearby, filled with thoughts, little lessons, and scribbled recipes. She would sometimes read a passage to the group. Fat is not the enemy. Hunger is not weakness. My body is not broken. It is wise, and it speaks to me every day. The others would nod, some with tears, some with smiles. They all felt it, that deep truth that their bodies, though older, were still speaking, still hoping to be heard, still capable of thriving. She began to see the beauty in the natural rhythms of life. There were days she felt stronger and days she needed rest. There were times when she craved a hearty stew and times when she wanted just a simple apple. And she listened to those cravings, not with guilt, but with curiosity. She trusted that her body was telling her something useful, something kind. That kind of listening became her new health plan. No apps, no charts, just breath, taste, memory, and trust. Even her grandchildren noticed a difference. "Grandma's smiling more," one of them said. "She's walking faster," said another. Margaret didn't brag about her changes. She just lived them gently, like a candle glowing quietly in the corner of a warm room. And every time she opened her pantry and saw the bottle of olive oil or the little bag of walnuts, she smiled and whispered, "Thank you," because those small things had brought her back to herself. And as she watched the sun dip below the trees, turning the sky a soft orange, she thought of how many people still lived in fear of food, still felt lost in their own bodies. She hoped her story would help them. She hoped they'd find peace. She hoped they'd remember that being older didn't mean being confused or left behind. It meant being wise enough to hear what the body had been saying all along. Because the truth is, our bodies don't need to be perfect. They just need to be heard. On your screen, you see 2 new videos that I'm sure you'll find helpful. Just decide what you want to see and click.